What happens like to this podcast, right? Someone wants to come along and it's like the Beatles back catalog. They're like, okay, we want to license the Identity at the Center podcast. You and I have both asked on, what happens to this thing that we've been doing for the last 5 years? It's just going to live out there somewhere, I imagine.
We hope it lives out there. I mean, like you said in the beginning, you did this because you wanted to be able to share this information and share that long history about identity into the future. So yeah, I hope it continues living on, but I don't know. I don't know that anybody knows, and that's part of the problem that we're dealing with.
So you mentioned a working group, is that you need people to be a part of it. So how does somebody become, if somebody out there is really interested in working on this problem, how do they get involved?
It's really easy. OpenID Foundation.
I thought you were going to say die.
No.
Wow.
We need test subjects.
That would be hard mode. Okay, let's not do that. Let's not go there yet.
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
Doing great. We're at the conference here in Carlsbad.
Carlsbad, California.
Yeah, California.
You're in a safe place. Your name is Jim. You're at Authenticate 2024.
But it's lunchtime, and I haven't eaten yet.
Yeah, no, neither have I. We're probably going to forego lunch in favor of recording, but yes, we're here at Authenticate 2024. We're in the expo hall, so we're not hiding the fact that we're in the corner over here, but definitely want to give a shout out to the Fight Alliance for hooking us up with a spot, the production crew for actually giving us microphones and speakers so people are wandering by, they can actually hear us. And of course, to our employers, RSM, for funding us from a travel perspective to get out here.
I'd say we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that.
Yeah, absolutely. As much as I like to get out of, so this episode's actually not going to go out for a couple weeks, but I have been dealing with hurricane issues in the Asheville area for the last couple weeks. So no water, no power, no internet, no cell service. It's been a couple weeks. I guess kick back the fourth wall. Today is October 15th, so it's the Tuesday of the conference. And so it's been 2.5 weeks, I think, since the hurricane came through at this point. And, fortunately, everybody's okay. No damage to the house. But not having running water, can't take showers, can't flush toilets.
Yeah.
We have plenty of supplies. What we don't have is enough of that non-potable water. So now we're trying to figure that part out.
Yeah, but you're the one who always says, "Oh, that sounds like first world problems." Not having running water, that doesn't qualify as a first world problem.
So we have workarounds. So the running water is definitely nice. I don't know if I'm yet on the cusp of saying is that a first world problem or not. Because I feel like water is really important. We can drink. We can go somewhere and take a shower if we need to. Is it ideal? No. But we are surviving. And I'm hopeful that by the time I get back from this trip, hopefully water will be restored or close to being restored.
Yeah, and obviously thinking about all the people who are less fortunate.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, if you've seen pictures on the internet of the Asheville, North Carolina area, it's just widespread, just devastation everywhere. It's really kind of sad because there's a lot of folks.
Now who's bringing the show down?
Yeah, that's true. But the show did go on while I was with Disconnected. You actually recorded a couple episodes.
The show must go on.
That's right. And I edited them in my car underneath a T-Mobile cell tower, so that I get internet connectivity. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, so here we are, Authenticate 2024. We just came off of doing a FIDO feud keynote thing yesterday on the stage, which I had a lot of fun doing.
Yeah,
hopefully people in the audience had half as good a time as we did on stage. I was not aware that someone was going to bring up a bottle of tequila and start doing shots while we're doing the game.
That was Christian.
Yeah. So if you missed it live, we are trying to turn into an episode. I'm not sure if it's already aired at this point for us or if it'll air after this, but I am trying to turn it into an episode, get the audio and the video files from the production team here. But it was a lot of fun. We have to do that again.
It was a huge hit. I mean, I had so many people saying they wanted more. They wanted it to continue and have more families come up and do the game show in front of everybody. And so that's a sign it went well.
Yeah. So maybe we can do that at Gartner in a couple of weeks. We're going to be there. We've actually got a discount code. If you use the code IDAC375, you get, guess what? $375 off of your registration. It's a very clever code. We'll have a link in our show notes for people to check that out. But that's in Grapevine, Texas. That's in early December. Jim, you and I are going to be there. I think we're doing something. You signed us up to do something.
Yeah.
So we'll figure it out, what it is that we're doing.
We're doing a case study.
A case study. Okay.
That's it.
All right. I guess we'll figure it out live. As far as today goes, we're going to talk about death.
Oh, man.
Yeah,
You're really bringing things up today.
Right. Death and the digital state. I want to introduce our guest today, Dean Saxe. He's the principal engineer, Office of the CTO at Beyond Identity. He's the co-chair of the FIDO Alliance Enterprise Deployment Working Group. And he's also the chair of the OpenID Foundation Death and the Digital Estate Community Group. Welcome to Identity at the Center, Dean.
Thank you for having me, guys. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
You know, this has been a long time coming. We've known each other for a while, and it's surprising this is the first time we've actually gotten you on. And you know what better uplifting story than to talk about death?
I wish I could be here to talk about other things, but, we'll take this opportunity while we have it. It's moving out of Amazon, I have a little bit more freedom to be open and talk and do these podcasts and things. And so it's a great opportunity. I'm happy to be here with you guys today.
I'm glad you're able to take the time. When you shared this topic with me, I think it was at probably Identiverse. Maybe it was around that. Yes. I was like, yes, I want to do that because I have stories about this myself.
I look forward to hearing those stories.
But it's something that, unfortunately, we have to figure out, right? As a society, but also as a industry from an identity perspective. But before we get too far, it's your first time here.
It is.
We got to ask you about your identity background. How did you get into the world of IAM? Is it something that you chose, or did it choose you?
It chose me. Funny enough, I didn't realize it, but back in the early 2000s, I was working in banking and banking software, business banking software. And I wrote an SSO service at that time to the specs of the customer, and then found a vulnerability where we were passing the account number in the query string of the URL, and it was encrypted, but we were also passing the IV in the query string of the URL, and quickly realized, well, if I manipulate the IV, I can actually manipulate what gets decrypted, and now I can move money into a different account, and that's a lot of fun.
This sounds like an Office Space type of situation. It was fractions of a penny.
Not quite slicing the salami, but it was fun. So fast forward a number of years, I did software security consulting, web hacking, other kinds of things for a number of years at Foundstone Professional Services. And in 2009, I landed at the Gates Foundation, moved my family to Seattle, and spent a number of years working there. And it was maybe 2010, I think, when I went to my first Gartner Identity Conference, I believe down in San Diego. And I saw people like Ian Glazer on stage and was like, wow, really interesting set of topics, and spent a couple of years at the Gates Foundation working in the realm of identity. In 2013, right at the end of 2013, I moved to Amazon, where I worked in retail, and I, for a little while, was a technical program manager for the Active Directory service that runs all of Amazon's internal Active Directory. And then eventually became a security manager, and then decided management is not for me, and went back to being an IC as a security engineer, where really my focus was 100% on identity. We founded an internal team to focus on the identity of Amazonians. That led me to meet Sarah Cicchetti, because I tried to hire Sarah to join my team, because I thought, wow, this person looks really smart, need to hire her. Got on a phone call and realized really quickly, this is not going to work. You are too smart for this job. But we became fast friends. And in 2016, I went to my first EIC conference in Berlin. Nope, not Berlin. Sorry, it was Munich at the time, or Unterschleißheim, which is not Munich. And then 2016, went to my first Identiverse, where Sarah got me on stage for the first time in a panel. And then it's been, going on from there. So around 2017, 2018, we joined the FIDO Alliance at Amazon. I found my way into the identity community in the FIDO Alliance. And maybe I have a bit of a big mouth and said some things that people liked. And here we are today.
At least you said things that people liked. Right?
Well, I also said things that people didn't like. But sometimes saying the thing that people don't like, but saying the right thing and doing the right thing for the people that we impact is the right way to move forward. And I strongly believe that, what we do impacts the lives of individuals every day. And it's really important to be clear about that fact and clear about the impact that the choices that we make as individuals, as companies, as standards developers, it impacts people, and we need to make choices that are good for other people and think about their privacy, their security, not just usability or how fast I can log in. I mean, those are great things and those are great metrics, but if we don't protect the security of those individuals, or we do things that maybe give them a false sense of security, then that's a bad thing, and we need to avoid that.
So now you're with Beyond Identity.
That's right.
Give me a little bit of an overview of what that is. And I know we're going to probably talk about this in a future episode maybe, but just give me the elevator story.
So the elevator pitch, and the reason I joined Beyond Identity is, as you know, I've been a strong critic of synchronized passkeys because I don't think they're useful for all use cases. They're a great password replacement, but passwords aren't really enough. And passkeys, synced passkeys, in many cases aren't really enough either. So Beyond Identity offers a device-bound credential bound into a TPM, a trusted execution environment, T, or a secure element that doesn't leave the device. It provably doesn't leave the device. And that was what attracted me to Beyond Identity, because particularly in the enterprise space, that is a really critical component for secure enterprises. And I have the pleasure of working with Monty Weissman, who I've worked with in the FIDO Alliance for 2 years now. And he is one of the fathers of the TPM. He was there in Trusted Computing Group 25 years ago when TCG was founded. I don't think it was called TCG at the time, and did the work to establish what we now call the TPM. And so there's a deep, deep pedigree of security in Beyond Identity, and joining that was really super exciting for me. And believe it or not, I got to join at the same time as Sarah Cicchetti. And in fact, now we've come full circle because she now is my boss. So funny how things work.
At least you didn't say you're too smart for the job.
Thankfully, that would have been a terrible reorg to get reorged out on that one.
Yeah, what I really love about your story is I hope people go back and anything they didn't understand of what you're talking about, kind of that history, they go back and do a little research, because I think having the context of how we got to where we are today is such a key to understanding why things are the way they are.
That's right. Yeah, and that's what I love about this community is we have great historical context from people like Pam Dingle and Eve Mailer. They've been there for a long time, and they're so open and willing to share information and ideas and talk about that history. I had dinner last night with Pam and a few other folks, and we talked about how we all got into the identity industry, and that was part of it, is sharing that knowledge and also making sure we pass that knowledge on, because we're not going to be here forever. We will eventually retire and move on and do other things. And so bringing new people into the industry, teaching them the lessons we've learned over the past 20 plus years, and helping them not repeat those same mistakes, is a good thing. And so it's good to do the teaching and mentoring and help bring people along on the journey.
Yeah, that's one of the things that Jeff and I thought when we started the podcast was this could be a time machine for the identity industry for as long as we do this thing. So let's pull people in who've been around for a long time, some of the people who are going to be around for a long time, and give that picture of where this industry is as of this decade and the surrounding decades.
Absolutely. I think that's fantastic. That's a great goal.
Yeah. So, Dean, you've been talking about death and the digital estate.
Yeah, that sounds so morbid.
Wow,
it's a real knee slapper. But yeah. I mean, you've been the leading voice, and maybe it was because nobody else wanted to talk about this thing, but it's really important. I'm just wondering what drew you into it in the first place.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not the only person who spoke about this. Kalia Young, 10 plus years ago, she spoke about death. She held, I think, 2 conferences called Digital Death Days. It didn't take off, surprisingly, because, everybody wants to talk about death and dying. And I should clarify when we talk about death in this context, we're not just talking about death in the sense of you are deceased, but also losing control of your own ability to manage your own digital estate. So if you're incapacitated in some way, that falls into this bucket as well. It's much easier to talk about death in the digital estate than death and incapacitation and the digital estate. So we've sort of shortened it. But how I got here is not a great story. As I mentioned, I was a consultant with Foundstone for a number of years. And after I left Foundstone and I moved to Seattle, one of my good friends that I consulted with at Foundstone we would spend, nights eating good meals, drinking good beer, sitting and playing Civilization in our hotel room between gigs.
Just one more round.
Yeah,
one more turn.
Exactly. Just one more, and suddenly it's like 3 a.m. So my friend Roman unfortunately passed away at the age of 39, and this was in 2010. And he left behind 2 small kids and a wife and a digital estate. And some of that digital estate was inaccessible. And that was really what got me started on this journey. I spent a lot of time thinking about the idea of how do we deal with this problem? And initially my solutions were pretty rough. I wasn't yet in the identity industry, or I was early in my identity career. And so the solutions really involved the concept of a dead man switch. And so if you're familiar with like a train and what a dead man switch is, the train conductor will step on a switch on the floor, and as long as he or she is stepping on that switch, the train can move forward. Pressure comes off the switch, and the train comes to a stop. Now, that's an imperfect solution too, because if the conductor happens to pass out and fall on the switch remains depressed and the train goes on. So now there's things like vigilance systems where an alarm goes off and the conductor has to hit a button to acknowledge that. And so it's evolved over time, but the basic idea is where I started. And so I thought, what if there was a dead man switch for our digital accounts where when you don't check in after a period of time, say 90 days, it releases all of your digital credentials, your passwords at the time, because that's pretty much what we were using, to your friends, your family, your loved ones, whomever it is that you decide to do that with. The problem is, as of last year, 2023, there was a study done that showed in America, only about 35% of users are using password managers. And that is a really low number, and that makes it challenging for that to be a successful mechanism. So fast forward a number of years from Roman's passing, and I found myself in Berlin in 2022 at EIC. We had just talked about passkeys being released. Synchronized passkeys came out earlier that year. I saw the writing on the wall with, hey, everyone's going to get better credentials. More people are going to have credential managers, and kind of saw where things were going. But I also saw things coming like mobile driver's licenses and verifiable credentials, and realized as the credentials got better and as they became bound more tightly to an individual human, it was going to be harder and harder to turn those credentials over. We couldn't just have a dead man switch. And so in Berlin in May of 2022, I had dinner and drinks and wound up at the Hilton Hotel in Berlin with Andrew Shikyar from the FIDO Alliance, Khaled Zaki from AWS, Tim Capali, then Microsoft, now at Okta, and Vittorio Bertocci. And late into the night, we were talking, and I brought up this idea of a dead man switch for your digital accounts. And Tim, being Tim, named it Dean's Desk Service. And so DDS became sort of the joke, but we all agreed something needed to happen, but we didn't know how to make it happen. And nothing did happen. And so fast forward to last year, the summer of last year, it was in July, when Vittorio called me and let me know that he was sick. And when Vittorio passed on October 7th last year, a week later, I found myself at IIW, and I led a session at IIW about death. And a week after that, I found myself right here in California, in Carlsbad, at this hotel. And amongst our shared grief and stories, we talked earnestly about creating something out of this. And that was really where Death in the Digital Estate came from. And later spent some time talking to Gail Hodges at OpenID Foundation across the winter and across IIW in the spring. And that led us to charter Death in the Digital Estate just last month. And we will have our first meeting in just a couple of weeks on the 15th, I believe, of November, 7 a.m. Pacific. I'll have to check the calendar and make sure I got that right. But I think that's right. So check the OpenID Foundation calendar and you can find the details on that.
So great that you brought up Vittorio's name. I mean, what a great human being he was.
He was. And, I work hard not to make this about Vittorio, because it's not about Vittorio. It's about all of us, because all of us are going to die.
Yep.
And most of us, most humans, will have some sort of digital estate. And there's the bits that you know about, like the photos and the social media posts, but then there's all the digital emissions that you leave behind, or digital exhaust, I think maybe Eve calls it, where you're being tracked for advertising or whatever purposes. And all of that falls into what we consider your digital estate. And we need ways to deal with that, that respect the humans that are involved.
I'm interested to know kind of what is the scope of the digital estate, because in my mind, very simple thinking 5-10 years ago was much more simple. URLs, usernames, and passwords. You could put them in a notepad.
That's right.
And pass them on if you at least like knew you were going to pass away soon or something like that. But we're here at a conference where we're talking about like killing the password and shifting much more to something you are. You know, the biometrics-based authentication is what a lot of this is going to turn into.
That's
what
right.
does that look like?
Well, you know, it's challenging, and one of the things Eve Mailer, who's been a great supporter of this work and really helped me think through a lot of this, she really is advocating for delegation, and I think delegation is the right mechanism moving forward. But we first need to define like what it is that is your digital estate, what is in scope, and what is out of scope. And I can talk very clearly about things that are out of scope, because things like financial data, particularly here in the US, we have laws like, I believe it's called RUFADA, that control how your financial assets are dealt with after death. That doesn't include your cryptocurrency. And I did actually speak to a lawyer who told me that she advises off the record her clients go figure out how to get that cryptocurrency, white hat, black hat, whatever it takes, go get it, which is super scary. Not everybody has access to a group of white hats or black hats to go get that data. But there are certain things that are clearly out of scope we need to keep out of scope. But what's in scope is, you know, anything that is representative of me or my thoughts or feelings digitally, whether it's located on my local hard drive, you know, sitting on a CD in my house. Do we use CDs for data anymore? I don't think we do. I don't know. I don't know. I found a whole spindle of them in the house the other day, and I was like, "Wow, this is crazy."
Did you throw them away though?
A whole bunch of blank
No, I
CDRs.
didn't, because I'm a pack rat. So no, I still have a huge stack of CDRs and DVDRs that I don't know what to do with. But you know, all of the data, wherever it exists, whether it's audio of me, video of me, my writings, pictures that I've taken. You know, all of that stuff is part of my digital estate, but it also is the cryptocurrency I own, and I don't play in that game. I don't own any cryptocurrency. But the cryptocurrency, your avatars on, like, Cam spoke this morning about Sony PlayStation, your avatar on PlayStation, right? I mean, that's part of your digital estate. That's part of who you are. So there's lots of things, right? There's an entire library of things, but then there's things that go beyond that, because we don't know what's going to be created in the next 5 years or 10 years. And so when I think about a digital estate, it includes things that we as humans haven't developed yet or are on the verge of developing. And so that creates a whole bucket of things that we have to take a look at, that we don't even know how to classify at this time.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about was photos, because we very infrequently go and get prints of photos anymore. We think, oh, we've got them on. Some people do Facebook, other people do Google Photos, or wherever people are storing them. If you lost those photos, I mean, those are family heirlooms. You look back when you have photos of your grandparents or you know, people long ago in your family who haven't been with us. Losing those photos would be a huge deal. You want to be able to pass those on for generations. So I think that's an important one.
Yeah, we no longer have the shoebox of photos stuffed under the bed, right? Now that shoebox of photos is stuffed into somebody else's computer in the cloud. And it's one of the things I think about with my own digital estate. Like, I was talking to some folks this weekend about it, and recognized that I don't have a backup of all of that. Like, I don't have an offline backup or maintain offline backups of my writings and other things. And I probably need to, because someday it's going to go away. So I mentioned RUFADA, the law that controls like financial assets in the U.S. One of the things that happens when you die is your credit cards and your bank accounts get frozen. And so what happens to the Google Cloud account that I have that runs a domain for my family, that has all of our email, our calendars, our notes, etc., or my iCloud account that has all of our photos? What happens to all of that when I die? and those credit cards are no longer chargeable. And suddenly Apple's like, well, got to shut your stuff down.
That's right.
And I could set up a legacy contact. And that's available through Facebook and Apple and other kinds of services. But it's there's a lot of activation energy that goes into actually thinking about that and doing that, frankly, I'm imperfect and human. It's been hard to overcome, and I haven't done that.
Yeah,
but I need to.
What I hear you talking about is that you rely on these services, say your Apple Cloud or Google Cloud, to store all these files, and you have to pay, even if it's as low as $1.99 a month, your credit card gets frozen. You don't pay that bill for whatever number of days. They just delete it, right? Is there a way to even restore it? I mean, that's the thought that needs to go into it.
It is. And Ian Glazer and I were chatting, and he was helpful and pointed out something about legacy contacts. So I believe it was at Apple he was talking about with legacy contacts. They get access to, say, photos and other documents, but they don't get access to your passkeys if they're stored in the Apple Password app or any passwords stored there. And so those things would have to be proactively shared with somebody else if you wanted to share that data with somebody in the event of your death. So there's so much to think about here. And, you know, as someone who's thinking about this a lot these days, and it's not something I enjoy thinking about, but it's the reality, it's near impossible to think about all the implications of what happens in the days to weeks to months after I die, when my family is going to be grieving and not in the state of mind to deal with all of this stuff in that short time frame before things start getting deleted, removed from services, etc., and may never be recoverable again.
Well, I think part of the discussion also needs to be about...
I don't have the audio from you.
There also needs to be some discussion around your wishes. How do you want to be received after you pass, right? So the story that I was thinking of when you mentioned this was my father. If you search for Jeff Stedman on LinkedIn, he has a profile there. It's been inactive for 12, 14 years ago since he passed, but it's still out there in the void of LinkedIn, in this case, of there's this profile. How should we treat things like that? How do we mark things as closed or, gone or whatever, things like that? And, are there ways to approach that?
I don't know that I have a specific way to approach it. I will tell you that, speaking of LinkedIn, I before I did the Identiverse presentation that I did the keynote earlier this year, I found on LinkedIn a person whose job change or job update said, so-and-so is now deceased at none. And I was like, wow, that is a terrible, terrible way to represent somebody in death.
Yeah, is that how you want to find out?
Right, it's not how I want to find out that someone I know professionally has passed away. But what was even weirder is people liked that job update because it was a job update, and I'm sure people are just blindly clicking through and liking this, and it was like, who likes this thing? So I think, as we talk about death with digital estate, I wrote down 3 of our organizing principles, because we need to organize around treating humans as humans, but that means we need to organize around principles of respect, because not every culture, every religion, every person treats death in the same way. And so I don't know how someone else's religion or culture treats death, and I don't want to state they should do things in a certain way. I don't think that's my place. I don't think that's anyone's place. I think it's a very personal set of choices. But also, we have an organizing principle of empowerment through consent. And someone challenged me on the word consent and said it should be choice. And I strongly believe that that's actually an accurate statement, that we empower people by giving them choices as to what they wish to happen to their data. And so that may mean, people are weird, and you've got a private stash of photos that you don't want anyone to see. You certainly don't want your kids or grandkids to see them. Maybe you want all that stuff deleted, or maybe you want some personal writings, like a personal diary, deleted. Maybe you want to archive your blog for posterity, or maybe you want to save it for some future date. Maybe you wish to delete your Facebook profile, your LinkedIn profile, or maybe you wish to make updates which are more personal and reflect the wishes and the choices of the individual. And so empowerment through either consent or choice or potentially both is really important. But that also means being able to delegate that access to somebody to maybe do those updates on your behalf. And then the third organizing principle was around interoperability and accessibility, because it's not good enough to be able to do this at one service at a time. We need a control plane. We need our own digital control plane to be able to determine or state our wishes in a way that makes sense, and enforces that set of choices or that consent that we are pre-authorizing someone to do things on our behalf.
So what do you feel is the right way for the industry to go about managing this? Is it individual's responsibility? Is it each company's responsibility? Should we have some kind of regulation? Or is it estate planners have to kind of come up to speed on including digital assets? Have you given thought to how this should be fixed?
Well, I'll answer your question with one word. Yes. Yes to all of the above. But it's really not as simple as that, I don't think, because we need fine-grained controls to do this. Gail Hodges pointed out to me the history of a living will and a power of attorney for, when you are unable to make medical decisions on your own behalf. And I did a little bit of research on it, thanks to Gail. And the idea of a living will came about in the late 60s. And the reason for it was, in the late 60s, medical care was getting significantly better. And what it meant was that doctors, nurses could prolong people's lives when they were in a near-death situation. But they did so at high expense to their families. They did so possibly by causing more pain and prolonging a person's suffering. And it really wasn't necessarily the ideal set of outcomes, and we didn't give people a way to make active choices about how they wished to be treated when they were ill and potentially facing death. And so it was out of that came in the late 60s and through the 70s the concept of a living will, where you choose actively what you wish to occur in certain situations. And I certainly have a living will. My wife has a living will. It was part of our estate planning. And
really, so everyone should have one? Do you believe that?
I think everyone should have one. But maybe what we need is to recognize that now, in this era, in this time on the internet, and I've been on the internet for way more years than I care to count, but it's north of 35, I think, now. Now I realize that we need something like that for internet denizens to be able to make those active decisions. And in the same way a living will states your wishes or your choices about what you wish to happen to certain things, we should have a sort of a living will for your digital assets. And similarly, the ability to have power of attorney or a similar kind of a concept. And I am not a lawyer, so don't quote me on these things. But a similar concept of power of attorney where you are delegating access to somebody on your behalf to execute your wishes when you can't necessarily do it, when you can no longer do it yourself, whether you're deceased or you're incapacitated temporarily or permanently. And so I think those models work, but we need more exploration because I don't think it's as simple as just that. I think it's that plus the control plane plus eventually trying to establish maybe protocols where through that control plane I can communicate to all the platforms I use, etc. These are my desires, these are my wishes, and there is a mechanism to execute those wishes. Maybe that's a bad term, but execute those wishes when somebody passes away.
So where does AI fit into this equation? Because I feel like we can't have a conversation now without AI being part of it. If I go off and create a AI version of myself, I would assume that becomes part of my digital estate, right?
Yeah, that would absolutely be part of your digital estate. You guys recently had a podcast with eMailer where I believe you talked about personhood credentials. And I read that paper that, a lot of authors were on that paper about personhood credentials. And I thought it was really interesting, but they spent a lot of time talking about agentic AI and creating AI agents that go out and do things for you. Now, that sounds really cool. I'd love to have, bots going out there and doing things on my behalf. But what happens to that bot when I die? Does it keep roaming the internet on my behalf and doing things on my behalf? And going and liking job updates and all these other things. And I mean, I know I don't do this because I'm an actual human on the internet who does things on my own behalf. But if I had something doing things on my behalf, does that continue after I die? How do we shut it down? Or do we shut it down? Mike Kaiser, when we were at Identiverse this summer, told a story about, I believe it was a man who lost his partner, and he had an AI bot of his partner that he kept alive for some period of time during his grieving. And
Well, it's also an episode of Black Mirror.
Oh, well, there you go. I'm not a Black Mirror fan, so I didn't know that. But that idea is really interesting, and maybe that was helpful for this person as he was grieving the loss of his partner. But was his partner consent? Did his partner consent to that? And so when I think about AI, what if we use AI to remix photos of me or audio and video of me? What if suddenly that audio says things that I would never say or do, or that video does things that I would never have done? So we need controls to prevent the reuse, the remix of that data, in addition to more of the agent-based AI stuff. It's a complex topic. There's no one right answer, and I certainly don't have all the answers, which is why I need intelligent people to come and help me with Death from the Digital Estate Community Group so we can work on this problem together. And it's not a problem that's going away. It's a problem that is only getting worse. Kalia Young, many years ago in a talk I watched, made the statement that, there are more people who are alive on the internet today than who have representations of death on the internet. And I thought that was a really interesting comment, because she went on to say, at some point we'll hit a tipping point where there are more people who are dead who have a representation on the internet than who are alive on the internet. And once we hit that tipping point, we're not coming back.
Yeah, that's interesting. So as far as you talked about the legacy contacts in terms of social media. And so what I thought was interesting is some people's social media accounts actually have monetary value, right? Maybe they have 20 million followers. Do you have any interesting stories of where people have passed away and they had accounts that people wound up in lawsuits trying to fight over?
Yeah, what happens to Mr. Beast's YouTube account?
It's so funny that you bring up Mr. Beast. I had lunch with Sarah Cicchetti and my team last week, and somehow the topic of Mr. Beast came up, and I said, who?
Yeah.
And she's like, no, really? You know who that is, right? I'm like, no. She's like, text your daughter. She knows who that is. And my daughter's 16. I text her, and of course, she's like, of course I know who that is, Dad. And then I talked to my son, who's 9. He's like, of course I know who that is, Dad. So I am apparently the uncool dad. But no, I don't have any stories. But it would be interesting to know that, because certainly the work that I've done around account recovery, I have seen instances where somebody, maybe a partner in a company, has died, and then how does that organization recover access to that partner's accounts, or maybe it's the domain name or whatever. And I mean, my domains that I think about this, how does my family recover access to those domain names? I think that expands when we talk about the monetary value of a Mr. Beast or whatever other internet star. I don't know, because I'm just not that cool. But that's a really a great thought, and I don't know how we deal with it. I don't know how their wills deal with it, or if it's even included there.
Well, what happens to this podcast, right? Someone wants to come along, and it's like the Beatles back catalog. They're like, okay, we want to license the Identity at the Center podcast. You and I have both asked on, what happens to this thing that we've been doing for the last 5 years? It's just going to live out there somewhere, I imagine.
We hope it lives out there. I mean, like you said in the beginning, you did this because you wanted to be able to share this information and share that long history about identity into the future. So I hope it continues living on, but I don't know. I don't know that anybody knows, and that's part of the problem that we're dealing with.
So you mentioned a working group, is that you need people to be a part of it. So how does somebody become, if somebody out there is really interested in working on this problem, how do they get involved?
It's really easy. OpenID Foundation.
I thought you were going to say die.
No.
Wow. We need test subjects.
That would be hard mode. Okay, let's not do that. Let's not go there yet. So through the OpenID Foundation, we chartered a community group. No IPR agreements required. We're not going to create any IP. So it makes it easy for those of you who work for large companies that don't or maybe hesitant to sign IPRs. The community group is through the OpenID Foundation, openid.net. I hope I got that right.
I'll have a link in our show notes.
Sweet, thank you. And it's the Death and Digital Estate Community Group through OpenID Foundation. You can simply join the mailing list. You can join the calls. We are working on what is known as a participation agreement. So it's a legal participation agreement that you have to sign. That will come in due course. It should be happening in the next couple of weeks here. And simply join and show up. Show up on the meetings, join the mailing list. We have a GitHub repo, and that GitHub repo, we're going to be collecting use cases and other data. We've got a set of deliverables that we hope to deliver over the next couple of years. And it's through that mechanism of regular Zoom calls that we will move this work forward. I had a reach out from somebody here in the FIDO Alliance, and he introduced me to a professor in Japan. And the professor works in sociology, but has spent the past 10 years exploring this topic of death and the internet. And he was very interested. He immediately joined the mailing list, and I look forward to getting his feedback and from his research, because I believe we need those academics to come in and help us, as well as lawyers and technologists and identity people. And everybody has a role to play. So I look forward to everyone joining us, you guys, and the folks here at the conference today, and your listeners, because this is a case where, if you want to go fast, go alone, but we don't want to go fast. We want to go far. And to go far, we need to go together. And I need lots of people to help me with this, because I don't have all the answers. I don't even know that I have all the questions to ask.
That's right.
And so it's up to us as a community to move this work forward and develop this work.
It's funny. This is how this industry works. Right? There's this idea, and then it starts to get shared, and then people start to put their heads together, and then the next thing you know, you've got SAML or XML or JavaScript, right? This is how
hopefully
it starts.
not JavaScript. I mean, that had a rough history.
Right, yeah. But this is how this sort of thing starts, which is really interesting. I'd be curious to see what are the cultural implications of this, because we approach it from probably an American point of view.
Right.
It might have a completely different meaning or in different contexts, right, around the world, and what the expectations are of how should this be approached from a human perspective, and not just this is what America says, right?
Right. And that's why we need a broad coalition of people who represent lots of different cultures, lots of different religions. I have my own set of beliefs, which are unimportant for the conversation, but they're probably different than yours, and that's okay. But we need to respect that everyone's belief set is different, and how they treat this topic is going to be different. And to do that effectively, we need a broad-based set of people to come and help define this for us, and not define hard controls in a way that is heavily influenced by our very Western perspective or American perspective, but rather develop controls that are flexible and work for people from all different religions, all different countries, and that's going to be, frankly, it's going to be difficult, right? I don't know how we will do that successfully, but we will make every effort to be as inclusive as possible in how we approach this topic.
Well, I definitely want to check in and get milestones. So open invite. As this thing progresses and there's things that you feel like, hey, the world needs to know about this, come back on, let's talk about it.
I'd love to.
And try to drive some more awareness from it and get it out there, right? People need to be aware that this is something that is being thought about. More heads, right? It's a marathon. I don't know if this is ever done, right? I think there's probably iterations, I would imagine, of what the definition of a digital estate means and what should happen, and all the things they haven't thought about or invented yet need to be accounted for as part of this.
Well, we need those academics who have worked in this space, and I know there's a person in the UK who did a thesis on this idea. I mentioned the professor in Japan. And so we need to start pulling in some of those resources as well. And, that's where having friends in this community who can help identify those people and help draw them in to help with the work is going to be so critically important to getting this done.
Well, let's lighten the mood a little bit.
Please.
Wrap this up with a little bit of a lighter note. I know you're a board game aficionado. I don't want to say it's like enthusiast, expert,
yeah.
right, et cetera. What's your favorite board game of all time?
Probably my favorite of all time. Man, that's a tough one. There's a lot that I like. So I'll tell you what
And you can be loose with your interpretation of board game,
well,
right?
I'll tell you what I've been playing a lot lately. I play a fair number of board games with my son. He'll be 10 in about a week. Actually, before the show airs, he'll have turned 10. But he really likes the game Morels, which is a card game. Very simple, 30-ish minutes. It's great. It's super easy. I like board games that are accessible to sort of all ages. Settlers of Catan has been a long-time favorite. Ticket to Ride, and I am completely blanking on the name now, but I'll eventually get there. It's French, and of
Somebody
course
in the
I can't think
comments
of it.
will call it out here.
Yeah, probably.
Can you describe it?
You're building cities. You're putting together tiles to build cities, and I cannot believe I cannot come up with the name, but it's a French name, and I am absolutely embarrassed that I cannot come up with it on cue here. But of course, things like Exploding Kittens and Exploding Kittens NSFW, I'll get it out eventually. Of course, I own the full set of Cards Against Identity. And I look forward to getting to play that with some of my Identity friends real soon now. Hopefully, I'll have a chance to do that in the very near future. But I enjoy more lightweight games, things like Agricola and Puerto Rico. Too heavy, I don't have 3 hours to sit down and play board games.
You need a break from civilization. You want to have a little bit of a lighter
exactly.
turn,
Yeah.
Jim, what's your favorite board game of all time?
So I thought about this question because I saw on our show notes you were going to talk about it, and I thought, well, it really depended on the time in my life. So you start out with like Chutes and Ladders, and
there you go.
Maybe it's Monopoly, and then Trivial Pursuit. I really loved Risk at one point in my life. Like I had some college buddies, we would do whatever, drink a beer, play Risk for hours on end, sometimes all night.
Love that.
You mentioned a game though, but because then I became a parent, and then it's like games that you can play with your kids. And the coolest one that I found was Ticket to Ride.
Yep.
And there's also a version you can put on your iPhone. If you want to totally geek out, you can play the game all the time. But it's a lot of fun. It's a pretty new game, I think. Like within the past decade. I mean, that's when I discovered it.
I think Ticket to Ride goes back to the late 90s, early 2000s, actually.
Oh, really?
It's when I first heard about it. And I do remember the name of the game finally, Carcassonne.
Oh,
I don't know why
yeah.
I couldn't come up with it, but Carcassonne is a great game. My entire family, my kids and I like it. My wife is not a board game player, which is okay. We will forgive her. She loves Uno, though, so we do play a lot of Uno in our house.
Uno's another one, yeah. But you mentioned Cards Against Identity. Justin Richer was on our podcast.
That's right.
He's a friend of the show, I guess. But I guess my final vote, Ticket to Ride.
Ticket to Ride?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I can get down with that.
So it's interesting you guys are looking at this from the angle of, your kids and the accessibility. I don't have kids, so I'm thinking of things like, Cards Against Humanity, right? Little more than not safe for work stuff. I enjoy that kind of stuff. There was Life when I was a kid. That was sort of like the big one, only because it's like a 3D game with there's a mountain and, cars and things like that.
Very 1950s, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's old school for sure. There was one when I was growing up, and I don't remember the name of it, but I think it was called Crossbows and Catapults. And it was almost like you're building forts on each side with kind of like giant Lego block type scenario. And you would have a crossbow or a catapult that was powered by a rubber band. And you'd have these little discs that you would shoot to the crossbow or try to launch the catapult to the other person's base and try to do as much damage as possible to their base. And so the skill was, can you aim it? Can you get just the right amount of tension right on the rubber band to launch the projectile into it? And so I don't know what it was, but I just have fond memories of one of my younger brothers and I playing that. And inevitably getting into fights over what was, the damage that the other was doing to the other place and things like that. So I would say crossbows and catapults is probably the one that has the most, visceral memory.
From that era, Stratego, I think, was one of the games that we played a lot.
Yeah, this one was
when I was a kid.
Yeah, Battleship.
Yeah,
Battleship on the back of an airplane seat with, people on the flight as well. Here's a meme I've seen where, there's two people playing Battleship and one person is sitting behind a cross so they can see exactly
that's awesome.
what they're trying to hit. And just if you're playing that on an airplane, just be aware of your surroundings. Make sure that
we should all be aware of our surroundings with airplanes. You have no idea the number of things that I've seen on people's screens inadvertently over the years. Because I spend a lot of time on planes these days. So we all need to be careful of that.
That's a good pro tip for travel for sure. All right, why don't we go ahead and wrap it up there? I'm getting a dry voice here. And you get some
we have
2 years, something like that. We're on the web, idacpodcast.com. Dean, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to have your LinkedIn profile in our show notes so people can check that out, as well as the website for the Deaf End Digital Estates, and also a link to Beyond Identity if people want to check that out as well. Let's see, what else? We're on YouTube, idacpodcast.tv. We'll take you right to our YouTube channel. Twitter, we're there. LinkedIn, connect with us on LinkedIn. Mastodon. I mean, we're kind of everywhere. LinkedIn
all
has
the
been the area
socials.
that we're...
What's that?
You've got all the socials.
Yes, but I think YouTube is the main one.
Great.
Go to YouTube, subscribe, ring the bell, baby.
That's right. Like and subscribe. And that helps us bring conversations like this to life. So, all right, let's wrap it up there. Thanks everyone for watching and or listening. And we'll talk with you all in the next ones.
Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate the time.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.